Listen closely, my friends. There is a moment right before you die when everything you postponed will collapse into a single breath. Every apology you never gave, every hour you burned on people who never deserved your fire, every fear you obeyed instead of question. That moment is coming for you, and it is coming for me, and nothing either of us does will stop it. But here is the strange gift hidden inside that terror. The people who have looked at death the closest, who have stared directly into it instead of flinching away, are the same people who learned, finally, how to live. 2,000 years ago, a small group of thinkers in Greece and Rome built a way of seeing the world so sharp, so unsentimental, that emperors, slaves, generals, and prisoners all reached for it in their darkest hour. They called it Stoicism. It was not a philosophy for comfortable afternoons or quiet libraries. It was built in plagues, in exile, in chains, in war, on battlefields and in prison cells, by people who had every reason to give up and refused. And it survives today because it was never about ideas for their own sake. It was a weapon for living, forged by people who had nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. Think about that for a moment. The men who built this way of thinking were not comfortable academics, theorizing from a distance about suffering they had never touched. One had been a slave whose leg was broken by his own master. One buried nearly every child he ever had. One was exiled from everything he loved, twice, and rebuilt his life from nothing both times. They did not write about resilience because it sounded impressive. They wrote about it because it was the only thing standing between them and total collapse, and it worked. If you are watching this because something in your life feels unbearable right now, a loss, a failure, a fear you cannot name, a version of yourself you no longer recognize in the mirror, you are exactly who this was written for. What follows are 10 lessons drawn from that ancient weapon, tested by people who had far less room for error than you do right now. They are not comfortable. Some of them will feel like a hand closing around your throat before it lets you breathe again. But if you let them in, if you actually let them change how you see your one and only life, you will walk away from this video a different person than the one who pressed play. Lesson 1. The rope that isn't yours to pull. Picture a lighthouse keeper standing on a cliff during the worst storm of the year. Ships are being thrown around like driftwood. Somewhere out there, sailors are screaming into wind that swallows every sound before it can travel more than a few feet. The keeper cannot calm the sea. He cannot reverse the wind. He cannot reach into the black water and pull a single one of those drowning men out with his bare hands. All he can do, the only thing he has ever been able to do, is keep his light burning steady, so that whoever survives the night has something fixed and reliable to steer toward. Most people spend their entire lives trying to control the storm instead of tending their own light. They rage at traffic that does not know or care that they exist. They replay arguments with people who have already forgotten the conversation entirely. They lie awake at 3 in the morning, rewriting a past that will not be rewritten no matter how many times they run the tape. Epictetus, a man who spent years in chains before he ever spent a single day free, built his entire teaching on one brutal, clarifying distinction. Some things are within your power, and everything else is not. And confusing the two is the root of nearly every unnecessary suffering you have ever felt in your life. Your reputation is not yours. Other people's opinions of you are not yours. The outcome of your effort, the result at the end of the road, is not yours either. What is yours is smaller than you think and infinitely more powerful than you realize. Your judgments, your choices, your effort in this exact moment right now as you listen to this sentence. That is the whole territory you actually govern, and it is enough. because it was always the only thing that was ever going to determine whether you suffered or whether you rose above it. Think about how much of your day gets swallowed by things you cannot touch. The comment section under a post you should have never read. The promotion someone else got for reasons that had nothing to do with your worth. The weather on the one day you needed sun. None of it moves an inch, no matter how hard you grip it, and every second spent gripping it is a second stolen from the light you were actually put here to keep burning for someone who needs to see it. This is not resignation, and it is not giving up, no matter how much it might sound that way at first. It is the opposite. It is realizing that your energy is finite and precious, that you will never get today back once it has passed, and every ounce you spend on the uncontrollable is an ounce you cannot spend building the one thing that was always within your reach: yourself, your character, your response to whatever the world decides to throw next. There is an old exercise worth trying the very next time you feel your grip tightening around something outside your control. Ask yourself a single question, out loud if you have to. Is this thing in front of me something I can act on directly, right now, with my own two hands? Or is it something I can only watch and hope about? If it is the second kind, the grip you are holding is not protecting you from anything. It is only exhausting you for no return at all, hour after hour, day after day, while the actual work of your life sits untouched, waiting for the attention you keep spending elsewhere. There is a second, quieter part of this lesson that most people miss entirely. Once you stop fighting the sea, you are left with an uncomfortable amount of silence, because you no longer have the storm to blame for your unhappiness. That silence is not empty. It is the space where responsibility finally lives, uncontested, waiting for you to pick it up. Most people avoid that silence for years because blaming the storm is easier than tending the light. But the keeper who finally stops blaming the wind is the only keeper whose light ever actually saves anyone. Lesson 2. The verdict you signed without a trial. Imagine a woodcutter walking past the same bent, twisted tree every single day for years on his way into the forest. Everyone in the village calls it the ugly tree, the failed tree, the tree that grew wrong from the very beginning. Then one winter, a storm flattens every straight, proud tree in the forest, snapping them clean at the trunk in a single violent night. The bent tree is the only one still standing in the morning because its very deformity had quietly taught it, year after year, how to bend without ever breaking. Nothing about the tree itself changed that winter. Only the judgment placed on it changed, and with it, everything about how the tree was finally seen. This is the second brutal insight the Stoics handed down to us across 2,000 years. It is never the event itself that wounds you. It is the verdict you pass on the event, usually within a fraction of a second, usually without a trial, without evidence, without any real chance of appeal. Someone cancels plans, and you rule, silently and instantly, that you are unwanted. You lose a job and you rule just as fast that you are worthless. The event happened out there, in the world. The wound happened in here, in your own private courtroom, and you were the one holding the gavel the entire time. This single realization, that our reactions are opinions and not facts, would later become the seed of an entire branch of modern psychology built on retraining exactly this kind of automatic, punishing self-verdict. But long before any modern science proved it in a laboratory, Stoic teachers were telling their students the same thing in the middle of a plague-ridden, war-torn world with none of our modern comforts. Strip away your opinion about what happened to you, they said, and examine what is actually left underneath it. Usually, what is left is far smaller and far more survivable than the story you built around it in the space of a single panicked heartbeat. You are not required to believe every verdict your mind hands down The instant something goes wrong, you are allowed to appeal. You are allowed to ask, is this actually true? Or is this just the fastest, most familiar way? My mind knows how to suffer because it has practiced suffering this exact way 1,000 times before. The people who master this question stop being victims of their own thoughts and start becoming judges of them instead, which is a fundamentally different way to move through a single day on this earth, and it changes everything downstream of it. Consider how differently the woodcutter would have felt walking past that tree for years if he had judged it correctly from the very first day, instead of only after the storm proved him wrong. The tree was never actually ugly. It was resilient the entire time, and the label the village gave it said far more about the village's narrow definition of beauty than it ever said about the tree. The same is almost certainly true of some verdict you passed on yourself years ago, a verdict you have never once thought to appeal. Try this the next time something wounds you. Today, this week, the next time life catches you off guard. Separate the raw event from the story you immediately wrapped around it in the first few seconds. The event is neutral. It happened. It is finished. It cannot be changed, no matter how much energy you spend wishing it otherwise. The story is yours, freshly written in real time, and stories, unlike events, can always be rewritten with a steadier hand. Consider how much of your own personal history has been shaped not by what actually happened to you, but by the earliest verdict you happened to pass on it, sometimes as a child too young to appeal any ruling at all. A single offhand comment from a parent, repeated once, absorbed as permanent fact. A single failure in front of classmates, filed away as a life sentence about your own ability. The event lasted seconds. The verdict has been serving its sentence for years, sometimes decades, entirely unexamined, entirely unappealed, simply because no one ever taught you that the courtroom was still open for a retrial. Lesson 3. Turning the blade against the wound. There is an old image, older than most of the philosophies built around it, of a blacksmith holding raw iron over open flame in the dark of a forge. The iron does not choose the fire. It cannot escape the heat, cannot negotiate with the hammer that will soon fall on it again and again, cannot decide it would rather stay soft and shapeless forever in a corner somewhere, safe and untouched. And yet it is precisely that unwanted violence, that unchosen suffering, that turns shapeless ore into something strong enough to hold an edge, strong enough to be trusted with real weight in the real world. Marcus Aurelius, a man who ruled an empire through plague, war, and betrayal from people he trusted, wrote to himself in the dead of night, in a journal he never intended for anyone else to read, that the obstacle in the path becomes the path itself, that what blocks the action can be turned into the action. This was not a slogan he repeated for comfort on his worst nights. It was a working method he used to survive years that would have broken almost anyone else who ever wore a crown as heavy as his. Every difficulty placed in front of him was reframed, deliberately, forcibly, as material to be worked with, not as punishment sent to destroy him, as material sent to shape him. Most people treat hardship as proof that life has turned against them personally, as though the universe has singled them out for cruelty. A relationship ends, and they read it as evidence they are unlovable at some fundamental level. A business fails, and they read it as evidence they were never capable in the first place. But the iron does not read the fire as evidence it was never meant to become a blade. The fire is simply the mechanism by which shapeless material becomes something with an edge, something with a purpose, something worth carrying into battle. Your setbacks are not verdicts on your worth, no matter how convincingly they disguise themselves as one in the moment. They are, more often than not, the exact temperature required to forge whatever you are actually trying to become, whether you asked for that temperature or not. This does not mean you pretend the pain does not exist, because that would be its own kind of lie. The iron genuinely burns in the flame. The blacksmith is not lying about the heat when he warns his apprentice to be careful near the forge. But there is a difference between denying the fire and deciding what the fire is for. One path leaves you shapeless forever, terrified of ever being placed near flame again, flinching at the memory of every burn. The other path leaves you sharp, tempered, and finally useful for something that matters, something heavier than you could have carried before the fire ever touched you. The next time life throws you into the fire without asking your permission first, ask yourself the blacksmith's question instead of the victim's question. Not "why is this happening to me?" as though the universe owes you an explanation it will never provide. Ask instead, what shape is this heat trying to force out of me? Because something is always being shaped in that moment, whether you cooperate with it or fight it every step of the way. There is a version of you on the other side of every fire you have ever walked through, and that version did not exist before the heat. You cannot meet them by avoiding the forge. You can only meet them by staying in the flame long enough to be reshaped by it, which is a harder thing to accept than almost any other lesson on this list. Notice too that the blacksmith never asks the fire to be gentler, because a gentler fire produces a weaker blade, and a weaker blade fails at the exact moment it is needed most. There is a temptation when life turns up the heat to pray only for relief, for the temperature to drop back down to something comfortable. But comfort was never what built the edge you are going to need later, in the moment that actually matters. And the fire that feels unbearable today is very often the reason you will still be standing when something far heavier finally arrives. Lesson 4. The company that writes your character. There is a story told about two apprentices who start their training on the same day, in the same city, with the same raw talent. One placed among master craftsmen who demand precision, patience, and honesty in every single joint of wood they cut, and the other placed among men who cut corners, lie to their customers, and mock anyone foolish enough to try doing the work properly. 10 years pass. Neither apprentice ever consciously chose to become who they became. They simply absorbed, invisibly, day after day, the standards of the room they happened to spend their working hours in. Seneca warned his students about exactly this invisible contagion nearly 2,000 years before modern research confirmed it. He said that we never return home from certain company with the same character we brought into it, that something rubs off on us whether we notice it happening or not, the way a sick man's illness can pass to someone who never touched him, only stood near him, and breathed the same air for too long. Character, in this sense, is not built in isolation, alone in a room with your own good intentions. It is built in rooms, among people, and most of us never once audit the rooms we spend our entire lives standing in. There is a reason certain rooms feel exhausting to leave, and other rooms feel energizing to leave, even when nothing dramatic happened in either one. The exhausting room was quietly asking you to shrink to fit it. The energizing room was quietly asking you to grow to meet it. Most people never name this difference out loud, and so they keep choosing the exhausting room simply because it is familiar, mistaking familiarity for belonging. Ask yourself honestly what standard the 5 rooms you spend the most time in are quietly training you to accept as normal. If the people around you treat mediocrity as an acceptable outcome, some part of you is being trained to accept mediocrity as acceptable too, no matter how loudly you insist otherwise inside your own head when no one else is listening. If the people around you gossip, cut corners or shrink from difficulty at the first sign of resistance, you are absorbing a blueprint for gossip, corner cutting, and shrinking, even if you never once agreed to any of it out loud or on purpose. This is not permission for cruelty toward the people currently in your life, and it is not a call to abandon everyone who has ever disappointed you. It is a call to honesty about what proximity is doing to you silently every single day, whether you are paying attention to it or not. You do not have to burn every bridge tonight in some dramatic act of self-improvement, but you can start choosing, deliberately and with real intention, to spend more of your limited hours near people whose standards are higher than the ones you currently hold for yourself, and fewer hours near people who have quietly been giving you permission to stay exactly where you are. There is also a mirror side to this lesson that most people conveniently forget. You are not only a passenger absorbing the standards of the rooms you enter, you are also, whether you like it or not, contributing your own standard to every room you walk into. Someone else's character is being written, in some small part, by the version of you they spend time around. That is not a burden meant to paralyze you with guilt. It is simply the other half of the same truth, and it means the choice to raise your own standard is never a purely selfish one. The rooms you stand in are writing your character, whether you are paying attention or not. And you are writing a line or two into every character standing near you as well. The only real choice available to any of us is whether we choose the rooms and the lines we contribute to them, on purpose instead of by accident. Lesson 5. Rising before your excuses due. There is a particular kind of farmer, the kind whose crops never fail even in a hard year of drought or flood, who wakes before the sun does, not because someone stands over him forcing it, but because he understands something most people never learn in their entire lives. The field does not care how tired he feels this morning. The weeds grow whether he slept well or not. The only variable he actually controls, the only lever available to him at all, is whether he shows up to meet the day before the day has already decided everything without him. Marcus Aurelius argued with himself about this exact struggle in the pages of his own private journal, the same journal he never intended anyone else to ever read. He wrote about the pull of the warm blanket, the temptation to stay curled beneath the covers instead of rising to do the work he was, in his own words, born to do as a human being with a finite number of mornings left. If the most powerful man in the known world had to argue himself out of bed on some mornings, you are not weak for feeling that same pull every single day. You are simply human, exactly the same as he was underneath the title and the crown. But notice carefully what he actually did with that pull instead of simply losing to it. He did not indulge it, and he did not shame himself for feeling it either, because shame rarely gets anyone out of bed faster. He simply asked himself a sharper question than the blanket was asking him. The blanket asks, wouldn't it feel better to stay warm just a few more minutes? The sharper question asks, what was I actually made for? And is staying warm really the answer I want to give myself on this particular morning? Most mornings, staying under the blanket wins by default, simply because nobody ever bothered to ask the sharper question out loud before reaching for the snooze button. Winning the first hour of your day is rarely about discipline in the way most people imagine it, all gritted teeth and white-knuckled willpower dragged out of thin air. It is about deciding, the night before, which question you are going to let win in the morning before you are even tired enough to negotiate with yourself. The people who rise early and build extraordinary lives out of ordinary days are not immune to the pull of comfort. They have simply trained themselves to notice the pull, name it honestly the moment it arrives, and choose the sharper question anyway, morning after morning after morning, until it stops requiring a fight at all and starts feeling like who they simply are. There is a deeper reason this particular lesson matters more than it first appears to. The way you meet the very first hour of your day sets the tone your mind will use to interpret every hour that follows it. Lose the first hour to the blanket and the excuse, and you spend the rest of the day in a slightly apologetic catch-up posture, chasing a version of the day that already got away from you before it began. Win the first hour, even by a small margin, and every hour afterward inherits a small advantage it did not have to earn on its own. Tomorrow morning, before you reach for the excuse that is already waiting for you, ask yourself the sharper question: what were you actually born to do today, with the limited number of mornings you have left on this earth, and is 5 more minutes of warmth really worth trading it for? There is nothing glamorous about this particular lesson, and that is exactly why so few people actually apply it. It does not promise a single dramatic transformation. It only promises that tomorrow, and the morning after that, and the one after that, you will meet the day slightly earlier than your excuses expected you to, and that small margin, repeated for months, becomes the largest and least visible advantage a person can build. Pause here for a moment before we continue, because if you have made it this far, something in what you just heard is already working on you, whether you have noticed it yet or not. Most people watching something like this will let it wash over them for an hour and then return, by tomorrow, to exactly the life they were living before they pressed play. That is not a judgment against you. It is simply the ordinary gravity every human being has to fight against, the pull back toward the familiar, even when the familiar has stopped serving them. Here is the honest question worth sitting with right now, before the next lesson begins. Of the 5 lessons you have just heard, which one landed the hardest, and why do you suspect that particular one was the one that landed? Usually the lesson that stings the most is not a coincidence. It is the one pointing directly at the exact place in your life where you have been quietly avoiding the truth for longer than you would like to admit, even to yourself in the privacy of your own thoughts. Lesson 6. Rehearsing the loss before it arrives. There was once a merchant who, before every voyage, forced himself to sit quietly in his own home and imagine the worst possible outcome of the journey ahead of him. The storm that sinks the ship without warning. The cargo lost forever to the ocean floor. The years of accumulated work erased in a single night of bad weather that no one could have predicted. His rivals thought him morbid, even cursed, for dwelling on disaster before it had any chance to happen. But when disaster eventually did strike, as it strikes everyone eventually no matter how carefully they plan, he was the only one among them who did not fall apart completely, because some part of him had already survived this exact loss 100 times over in the privacy of his own mind before it ever touched his real life. The Stoics practiced a version of this deliberately, sitting with the possibility of losing what they loved most, not to invite misfortune closer, but to strip fear of its single greatest weapon, the element of surprise. Seneca wrote that nothing should ever come as a surprise to a person who has properly prepared themselves, that we should send our minds ahead into every possible difficulty on the road, so that when difficulty actually arrives, we greet it as something rehearsed, rather than something that ambushes us from behind while our guard is down. Most people do the exact opposite of this. They avoid even the thought of loss, as though thinking about it might somehow summon it into being, and so when loss inevitably comes anyway, it arrives as a total stranger they have never once prepared themselves to meet. This is not pessimism, no matter how similar it might sound on the surface. A pessimist expects disaster and does nothing at all to prepare for it emotionally, simply waits helplessly to be crushed by whatever comes. This is closer to a soldier checking every single buckle on his armor before a battle. He sincerely hopes he will never actually have to fight. You do not check the buckles because you want the battle to come. You check